Hello, everyone. Welcome to Road to Reason. I'm Rick Wingrove.
And I'm Rob Penzak.
And this week we're going to be talking about the Bible. But first, I want to update us on a little news story that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago. The Pope teased us a little bit, saying that perhaps atheists could get into heaven. Then they pulled that back. Now, apparently, if you like the Pope or you follow the Pope on Twitter, you can get some time off from purgatory. So we don't know what the increments are, the time increments, but it seems like with enough sock puppet accounts, you could probably zero out your time on in purgatory, and it's just a numbers game at that point. So more good news dangled there for us.
Do they have the rates listed anywhere if I can put some down?
No rates. I would like to find out if somebody knows.
And this isn't the Onion, this is just like a straight real thing that they're bringing back indulgences. And,
apparently a real thing, just like the indulgences from the Middle Ages, where apparently there was a menu which you could select from and choose your pricing comfort zone.
We can help out our friends and our family if we want to be a good Christian, actually, if we want to help out other people without enough money to buy their way out of this.
Exactly. So we're seeing a little of that come back. You know, it's about capitalism.
All right.
You know,
so it is a progressive, it turns out.
As it turns out, you know, some say he's an atheist. Who knows? Anyway, the Bible. You know, a poll last year, probably every atheist has probably seen it or heard about it, but showed that atheists seem to know more about the Bible than most Christians do. For me, all those years, Mama made me go to Vacation Bible School. May have paid off a little, I don't know. It remains to be seen. But a lot of people are out there making a lot of claims about what is or what isn't in the Bible. They just don't seem to know. And that's fine. I mean, people can believe whatever they want to. That's the beauty of our system. People can believe anything they want to, but nobody can impose those beliefs on anybody else, certainly not by force of law. And I ask, what could be fairer than that? So, but it's not that. People are entitled to believe, but it's when when people believe in these Bronze Age superstitions, but then they attempt to impose those beliefs on others by force, which they inevitably do, and when they try to impose Christian Sharia because of those beliefs, when they try to destroy science, when they try to impose any kind of theocratic laws on the unconvinced and the unwilling, then I, for one, am going to need to see a little proof.
Right, and we're seeing this all over the place just in modern politics, where the religious right has gotten more than a foothold, right? They run the Republican Party pretty much right now.
Pretty much.
And you see, you know, a war on women, however you want to characterize that, the very strong anti-science that you're talking about, and it's affecting real life. And as global warming rolls toward us and we continue to ignore it because of a combination of religious right ignorance going along with this and capitalist pressures that don't really care what happens to lots and lots of people as long as they, in the top, you know, percent of a percent, continue to accumulate all this money. It really matters what people believe, and you know, that's why we need to kind of talk about this.
True, and it's not a hard argument to make that those things are all religious-based, Bible-based, primarily. The destruction of science, the young earth creationism just, you know, drives me nuts. And, you know, it's just one example of a Bronze Age superstition, people pushing it hard and trying to call that science and call the actual science of evolution religion. So it's, you know, we're down the rabbit hole at this point.
Right, or to brand a lot of real science as junk science. And this, again, has been a very purposeful effort by some of the people who stand to make a lot of money, where they go out and, you know, tear apart the scientists who are actually spending decades of their lives to understand this stuff, and then they try to, you know, go into serious smear campaigns. And again, it's supported by a combination of things. You know, people with a financial interest, it's not hard to see why they do it. But then you also have you know, a big bulk of religious people whose ministers and priests tell them to vote this way because then we can get our anti-gay agenda and anti-women agenda and some of those, you know, Bronze Age thoughts. We can get those enacted, and there's no other way we could possibly do it. And again, the anti-abortion legislation going through right now all across the country, the voting laws that are getting passed, it's very real. You know, nobody can deny it. You just have to look at politics and see what's happening. And you know, people should be worried about this.
They should be. And how obvious does a conspiracy have to be for people to take notice? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but when 31 Republican state legislatures suddenly introduce the same law, same verbiage, essentially tailored to local conditions, but when this all happens at the same time, clearly they've met and decided this is what they're going to do. and they're going after it. But when they do this, when they pull these things like this, try to impose religion in subtle ways and obvious ways, I think it becomes an open subject, as it always has been, for discussion. And it's of some relevance whether or not the Bible is true. It opens up the subject of how truthful, how accurate, and how consistent with facts we know about the universe it really is.
Right. If we're all going to live in this real world here, we really do need to kind of stick to the facts as we make our decisions about how to run the country, how to run our families, how to try to make this a livable world and a better world. I know you end a lot of shows saying, okay, everybody go out there and read your Bibles. I'm one of those kind of semi-beginners that I took some courses in college, but I don't consider myself any kind of expert. So I picked up this excellent little friendly, I don't know if we can get a better picture of this, a very kid-friendly Bible here. And you said that you actually spent a little time of your youth doing this VBS.
Well, VBS is Vacation Bible School, so this is geared for children.
Right, so let's see how this starts. First of all, the Bible is special. It's not like any other books because it is the Word of God. Many years ago, God told Bible writers that He wanted us to know, and they wrote down God's words for us to read, learn from, and obey. And obedience, I think, is pretty important there. The words you read in the Bible today are the same ones that God told people to write thousands of years ago. Every word of the Bible is absolutely true because it comes from God. How do these publishers know that?
Well, we're going to examine how true the actual words are, but saying they're the words of God, they're actually the words of men. There's no disputing that human beings wrote every word of that. Now, if they claim that God directed their words, if somebody's saying that now, we know they're insane and we lock them up. So it is highly doubtful that these are actually the words of, some Bronze Age deity.
Right.
These are people talking, and it reflects a culture that existed at the time and clearly has little relevance for us today.
But we talked about presuppositional apologetics a little bit several shows ago. You had a story, there's somebody that, again, they sort of assume that they're right, they assume the Bible is correct, and go from there to prove that they're correct by assuming it. What was your...
Right. Excuse me just a second. Pull up my reference. Had an opportunity in Florida about a month ago to talk to a guy named Cy Ten Bruggen. You can find him all over the internet. He's all over YouTube. He's a presuppositional apologist. And he and Eric Hovind and some other guys like to start off with a circle on a chart. And they say, their argument is that this is the totality of knowledge in the universe, and this is what we know. Okay, there's already two assumptions there which are indefensible. But based on that, he says, is it possible that somewhere out here in the area where we have no knowledge that God could exist?
When you say that's a nice little trap. Because,
it's a trap. It's
right,
a linguistic
all
trap.
Scientists are going to want to say, well, anything is possible.
Atheists and scientists think they're answering a mathematical or logical question, and the correct answer is, well, yeah, there is a chance. But the correct answer in this argument, because the question is not mathematical or logical, it's a semantic trap, and if you answer yes, it is possible that God exists out there, you've just lost the argument. He will walk all over you because you've just given up knowledge.
Right. Well, it's an infinitesimally small chance. It's like, everything is probability wave, so maybe I could put my finger through the book, but once you're dealing with something with enough molecules, it just doesn't happen.
Well, the chances are also all the air molecules in the room could all end up on this half and vacuum over here, but it's never going to happen. It's not just unlikely. It's so unlikely it is impossible. And also, saying that God exists out there because we don't know God exists is a logical fallacy. And it's just as likely that the flying spaghetti monster exists out there, which I believe is slightly more likely.
Right, which you might. Now, you have enough background and education to be able to see through some of that or read through it, learn about it. The problem with little Bibles aimed at children like that, and we'll talk about little Anna here, who I'd like to dedicate this show to, is they don't. When you're 2 and 3 and 4, we've talked about before, for evolutionary reasons, you trust your parents or you trust whatever the authority figure is right there in your life. Mm-hmm. So this Bible, not accidentally, starts off with a couple of little kids. Lindsay sat in one of the comfy chairs in the library reading her Bible. Anna looked at Lindsay like she was crazy. Hey, Lindsay, why are you wasting your time reading that Bible? Asked Anna. It's just a bunch of stories of old men anyway. The folk tales. We don't even know who wrote it. And now they're going to go through. So here we have our skeptic Anna, who's not really such a skeptic. She's 2 or 3 or 4, maybe she's 6 or 8. I don't really know how old this little kid is, but this isn't somebody at the age of reason, and they're going to start to, manipulate these little kids into believing in the Bible.
Right.
So when they grow up, they're not asking these kind of questions. In terms of the Bible, for the people that think this was God handed down His Word, is that how the Bible came about? Was it just one masterpiece that God handed to somebody?
I don't think so. The actual authors of the Bible, we don't know. There are no original copies of the Bible. One of the best things we have to look at, there's a guy named Bart Ehrman, who a lot of people out there have read. He wrote a book he's written several books, but one called Misquoting Jesus. Bart Ehrman is a biblical scholar, and he has access to 6,000 complete and fragmentary copies of the New Testament in Greek. No two of those are alike. So much for inerrancy right there.
Well, it's funny you bring that up because there's another quote, I'll probably skip the quote, but where it basically says some of the evidence that Lindsay is going to use to show Anna that there really is a God and this really is God's Word, is that you look at all these Bibles and they all say exactly the same thing. What a miracle. It obviously is true, except our argument.
It's not even true a little bit.
You look at it, you can document it if everybody wants. There's tons and tons of Bibles. Go out there and start comparing them, or go to the great website you told me about was the Skeptic's Guide.
Skeptic's Annotated Bible, which is an outstanding resource.
Right, and click on the link where it shows 100 differences between the Bibles, and they're significant. Where was Jesus' lineage? How many people in between them? And all sorts of everything you can imagine. None of the Bibles agree upon. It's not that there's one error; there are thousands.
Yeah, there's a couple of great sites out there that map the inconsistencies and the errors. But talking about Bart Ehrman's New Testaments, it's not just transcription errors or somebody trying to copy something dim light late at night. There's clear fraud in there. He talks about one of the better known stories in the Bible, which is about when the Jews bring the harlot before Jesus, and he says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And then they go away, and he tells her, "Go and sin no more." That doesn't exist in any early editions. It doesn't show up before, I believe, the 6th century. It's a clear insertion, 6 centuries after the Bible, all these incidents are supposed to have happened. So there's fraud going on, even back then.
Right, I mean, there's, I think most of the Bible is probably put there for political reasons, being able to maneuver and manipulate people. There's a great one from Martin Luther. I'll put it on our website or Facebook afterward. I don't remember the exact quote, but where he very purposefully inserted a word to support his view that everybody should be able to read and interpret it themselves. And there was a lot of flack at the time, and people disagreeing at the time and calling him on it that you inserted it. And he was like, no, I can read the Bible, just as well as you. I know what I'm doing. And we all know what they're doing, right? People put the words into the Bible so they can interpret it their way and create their new sect, which disagreed with all the other sects, and that's why they that's why they did it.
Right. It's also worth a little perspective too. The Bible is one holy book, one of many. The reason it holds as much eminence as it does, if I'm using that word correctly, is that in a large part of the world, in this hemisphere, for 2,000 years, it's been highly lethal to question the veracity of that book, to even ask questions. So if you spend 2,000 years just illiterate, awash in poverty and squalor, and you've got this being spoon-fed to you, and not just given to you, but you have these dire threats of eternal damnation and torture, and real threats of torture. I mean, the church in Europe had literally a license to kill for pretty much 1,000 years, and they used it to good effect. And that's why that's the biggest selling book in history. Well, for a long time, it was the only book in history.
They never went to convince people on the merit of their arguments. It was, like you said, under the threat of the catastrophic things that would happen to you and your family, and the promise of a much better world. So don't worry that you're getting it. You're not doing too well here, because in the future in heaven you'll do much better. In fact, if you're poor, you're really set.
Right.
Except for all the rich people and all the Pharisees and the leaders of the church and the televangelists today. They really don't seem to have any qualms about being quite rich here. They don't seem too worried about getting through that eye of the needle.
Well, they call it prosperity gospel. They've justified their way around that with Bible verses to support, which brings us to kind of the point. People who are Christians, you hear a lot about cafeteria Christians. They pick the verses that they like and don't even know the rest. And I saw, I forget where I saw it just this week, it's probably something on YouTube, probably a caller into Atheist Experience. They were saying, well, there's this thing in the Bible. And this guy goes, I don't believe that's in the Bible. You know, why would you even say something like that when that's one of the easiest things in the world to prove if something is or isn't in the Bible? And they read it to him and he had nothing to say. But, you know, we should probably talk about some of the specific things it does say in the Bible, which are a little questionable.
Yeah,
First, let me remind people that we're going to be taking call-in. We're taking live call-in starting in a few minutes. So call in with questions, comments, you know, give us something to talk about.
Right, and before that, as some of you know, our producer Paul has recently gotten out of therapy, and he said he's going to start putting together a new segment where he runs some videos for us to try to grapple with and for our callers to take a look at too. So Paul, if you want to run that.
Oh,
Perfect. You win. Japan. Round 1. Fight.
Shinku Hadouken! Yeah! Yeah! Hadouken!
Round 2. Fight.
Shinku Hadouken!
You win. USA. Round 1. Fight. 1. Thailand. Round 1. Fight. Tiger. Tiger. Tiger uppercut. Tiger. You win. Thailand. Round 1. Fight.
Psycho Crusher!
Round 2. Fight.
Psycho Crusher!
You win. Perfect.
Get over here! Finish him!
Okay.
Well,
I hardly know what to say.
But I think it goes pretty much without saying that Paul should not be out of therapy. We had Dr. Andy Thompson, a psychiatrist, here a few weeks ago. We will see if he's watching. Please call in and help Paul. In terms of the rest, to play devil's advocate for a second.
Please do.
In a very literal sense, because the devil got kind of the short end here. God should be throwing lightning bolts. We know that from Zeus, from Thor, or Hammer. So I don't know what he was throwing there. And I don't know if he's going after the devil or after the women and the children, which might go in line with this. Maybe Larry from Leesburg is on the phone. Maybe he can help us make sense of this.
Maybe. Larry, are you there? Hello?
I don't know if he wants
Larry?
to talk to us. I think Larry may have got frightened off by that.
Yeah.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hey.
So I have a quick comment. That by the way, that was a really funny video. But I have a comment and maybe a point for discussion here. So one of the big moral problems that I have with the Bible is how it deals with slavery. Okay, and that's one of the biggest problems, among many things that I've seen with the Bible. And there's this. And especially Old Testament, right? That's where slavery is not only, there's instructions on actually how to treat slaves. And, but, you know, the New Testament doesn't do slavery any justice either. I mean, Jesus had many times to confront the issue, and he never did. Meaning, you know, I guess indirectly, I guess he was okay with it. But there's this great book that I want to, and I don't know if you guys have heard about this book, but it's a book from a gentleman by the name of Robert L. Dabney, who was a Christian theologian and a Confederate Army chaplain during the Civil War. And he wrote this wonderful book called A Defense of Virginia and Through Her the South. And he lays out very nicely both Old and New Testament justification for slavery. I mean, just hands down. And he says it, and he called it it's a moral thing. So I just don't know if you guys have heard of that book or not, but that's something, you know, interesting point about the Bible.
Hadn't heard about the book, but you know, we do know that the Old Testament does endorse slavery and sets pricing and handling and several other things. And of course, Jesus never denounces slavery and does talk about servants, proper behavior for servants.
But I think obedience is a very big thing in religion in general. And so when we're preaching for the slave to behave well and properly toward the master, it's hard to say anything other than, yes, they're condoning it. And you'll see a lot of tap dancing around that. Again, most people in the United States are religious. And you know, so plenty of those people happen to be my friends. Most of them are very nice people, but they don't get their morality from the Bible, as we've talked about before. Bill Maher last night, I saw it last night, had a very progressive religious person. I don't know if he was a minister or a priest, I forgot his exact title. And he's been in jail many times for picking up many social causes. But Bill Maher brought up that very question of slavery. It was like, okay, this is supposed to be an inerrant book. How do you account for this? And you know, he just had a tap dance. This is somebody who's gone to jail, spent his whole life fighting for these things, and he just can't face up to the fact that this cannot be God's word if we have a perfect, omnipotent, caring, benevolent God where he looks past slavery and does nothing about it. And it wasn't a short-running institution. I think some of the first slaves came over on the good ship Jesus. You know, this is
that true?
slavery. Yeah, no, I believe so. You know, we'll have to look that up again. I'll try to put any facts that we got to double check up on the website and Facebook later. But you know, it's a misnomer for nice religious people nowadays to try to say, you know, no, the Bible fought against this, because it didn't. You can find good and bad, or you can find arguments for almost everything in the Bible, which is very expansive, but it takes a lot of tap dancing to deny it.
Right, and it's one of those areas of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, which apologists have a lot of difficulty explaining away.
Mm-hmm. No, and I've heard, I've gotten into this debate with Christians in the past, and I mean, they try to rationalize the Old Testament versus New Testament. The fact of the matter is, I mean, the Bible was actually used, as a tool to keep slaves as slaves, even themselves. I mean, the slave owners would justify and would promise slaves, redemption once they die in heaven and this like that. But essentially, everybody's a servant in a way, and it's their moral duty. That's what they would teach these slaves. It's your moral duty to be a slave because that's what God's want. It's in the Bible, and and so it's I think it's a incredible morally bankrupt book when it justifies slavery. And the whole argument that the Old Testament was the Old Testament, things were different back then. Look, if the Holy Spirit is supposed to transcend time, then what made it moral back then and immoral now? I mean, that's just very inconsistent for an all-knowing, all-powerful God.
And it is a problem for them to explain, and it does tend to tie people in knots when they're trying to play their apologism for that.
Yeah, it's incredible though the rationalization I've been hearing. It was different types of slaves. And then, I mean, just like they try to really, they're grasping at air. Trying to define or rationalize slavery in the Bible. I just always thought that was a big problem for Christians when they are trying to use the Bible as a moral document.
And this, you talk about different kinds of slavery. Even if they go with that, the slavery in the United States was amongst the most brutal anywhere, where we did use biblical arguments to support it for many years. So I'm not sure how that argument would work in their favor.
And that's only one of a number of things we're going to talk about here that are probably a little hard to explain for the apologists. We're about to go on break, Larry. Appreciate your calling.
And thank you for the reference, too. If anybody has books that we should take a look at, things that have good information, please let us know about those too, or articles. We're happy to read them.
Before we go to break, we've got a new thing we're going to do here, a question to answer, and we'll give the answer when we come back from break. Paul? Any second now. We should have this up.
NASA right now. Scientists and engineers are working every day to help humans learn how to better care for our home so that we never have to leave. NASA has a fleet of satellites around the planet that keeps track of climate change and studies how humans are affecting the planet. NASA has a ton of geniuses, and all of them are working for a future that has a healthy Earth in it. Like when NASA helped find the hole in our ozone layer so we could fix it before the problem got out of control. NASA is doing its part. We have to do ours. This is our home. To learn more about how NASA is keeping an eye on Earth, visit www.nasa.gov/Earth.
When I was younger, I didn't want to admit I had a serious disease. Because of my diabetes, I lost the sight in my left eye. Misconceptions continue to surround this monster public health issue. But the simple truth is, diabetes can often be prevented and complications avoided. You're not alone. Understand the realities of diabetes and know that you can manage it and lead a full, active life.
There's an alarming trend in the world today. Everywhere you go, people are saying that cinema is dead. But cinema is not dead. My name is Count Simon Gauntley, and on my television program, Count Gauntley's Horrors from the Public Domain, I make it my mission to resurrect forgotten film classics. I promise to dredge the sewers and ford the stagnant streams of film history to ensure that no film is truly lost to the ages. Count Gauntly and FPA, keeping cinema alive! Alive! Alive!
Well, even though Joseph's been gone 18 months, we've made the decision to keep all his things as they were when he was here last. I finally just packed his toothbrush away like 6 months ago. It had been sitting on the counter in the bathroom. And I was cleaning the bathroom one day and I just thought, okay, it's time to put the toothbrush in the medicine cabinet.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
Okay, if you don't recall the episode, most atheists should be aware of this one, but that was Jim Jones, People's Temple in Guyana, where he had them literally drink poison Kool-Aid. When you hear the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid, especially in reference to the right, that's what we're talking about. That's where it came from. They drank the Kool-Aid and killed men, women, children, and dogs. So, welcome back.
So I guess that's one very concrete, tangible way that religion can harm, when people buy into all sorts of nonsense and can be led to do things. You probably would not have a class of chemistry students when they say, okay, drink this hydrochloric acid because somebody's going to protect you. Right. They probably would walk out of the class before they...
Yeah. They also murdered a sitting U.S. congressman in that episode too. So, yeah, definitely real, concrete harm done by religious fanaticism. Okay.
Hey, you had some specific Bible quotes you want to go over?
Things that are in the Bible that the apologists have a lot of trouble explaining away. I had I think I mentioned the opportunity to talk to Eric Hovind for a while down in Florida about a month ago. And I was trying to remember a verse about Jesus behaving badly. And the one I was trying to quote was, or I thought I was trying to quote Matthew 10:34, which says, "Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword." And I was wrong. The verse I was actually trying to find was Luke 19:27. But those mine enemies, which would not that I should reign over them, bring hither and slay them before me. That's Jesus basically saying, kill anybody who isn't, willfully following.
Again, these aren't willing converts that were won over by a message of love. These are people that just going to get slaughtered. And this is New Testament, not Old Testament, because that's another common thing that you'll hear is that the Old Testament, that wasn't the real God as we see him now. That was, a lot of metaphors, although I'm not sure what the metaphors and the symbolism, how you can fix that, but that the new God, the Jesus, is a loving, friendly, caring, and as you read these Vacation Bible things, every other sentence in there is about how he's going to take care of you and love you and the warmth, and not as much about the swords and the slaying those who aren't convinced.
Yeah, it's a little psychotic and angry.
It's a little.
And again, this guy would be locked up if he were walking around today. We would recognize this for the insanity that it is.
But not necessarily here in America, sadly. Most
so
of
much
throughout Europe they would, but it's getting scarier here as we...
And hope this guy didn't get a Florida jury on his side, so.
Yeah.
Bada boom.
Bada boom.
So.
All right. You want to go from there? You want me to read our next installment of Lindsay and Anna, the two hapless victims of the childhood indoctrination that's going on in the Vacation Bible here? Conversation with Lindsay helped Anna understand a lot about the Bible she had never heard before. It was all starting to make sense now, how God told men to write down his words and how he has kept the Bible the same over time so that we can read and understand it. Now, I've done some of that. Let me jump to another one on the, I see where we had a good, they tend to go over some things that we atheists use to prove that's not true. here's part that with the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the men who wrote the Gospels, all lived when Jesus did and reported about his life. Now, they don't really know who wrote the Gospels. Most of these people never knew Jesus. It was written decades after he lived for the most part.
Plus, Luke also mentions the destruction of the temple, which happened in 70 AD.
Yeah, right? I mean, so it's very readily confirmable, and basically all biblical scholars who aren't active Christian apologists kind of admit this stuff. You know, I don't know how this line gets through regular editors, if they're fact-checking or if they're interested in facts, and that's a big part of the problem with faith-based stuff, is facts are the enemy or facts are irrelevant. And you could see it with George Bush and his cabinet, how they took such pride in calling the reality-based community, you know, those outsiders who try to interpret what they're doing aren't the real players in history. We have to live in a factual world. You know, that's where we do live. They can ignore it. But when we have to suffer the consequences, it's a real problem. And even if you're spiritually inclined or you want the comfort of a loving God, that doesn't make the Bible true. You can't use it as proof that you want it to be true. And you have to account for all of the nastiness in here. And like you said, it's the shopping cart of, well, I'll believe in this stuff that helps support me, but there's lots of things that most kind, decent people nowadays, you know, would turn away from.
But you pointed to W. Bush, and it reminds me of the attack on science, where they essentially forbade NASA from using the term Big Bang. You know, the prevailing scientific understanding of the beginning of the universe as it now exists is forbidden to be mentioned by its name, and this is part of the effort, of course, to be a proponent of the ridiculous biblical creationism fable.
Right, and this, you know, it's not just that one thing. You know, we talk about with climate change, how they went through and redacted a bunch of stuff, forced them to change things with the Environmental Protection Agency. You know, it's constant now that the science is getting written out or written over, and it's acceptable to a large percentage of our population. And that's a real problem, again, with religion. If you are willing to live in a faith-based manner and not apply logic, not believe in facts, not try to apply reason, you're much more susceptible to be sort of okay, he must be doing the right thing. If you have any kind of scientific basis at all, you're going to be appalled that, you know, scientists who dedicate 20 or 30 years to understand these complexities can get together by the thousands, come up with research that can help the planet and the people on it, you know, survive something, and it just gets shoved aside by money and faith. And, you know, there's a group of, if it was 6,000 scientists, wrote a letter condemning all the Bush things. But again, until there's a mass of people that reject this way of thinking, it keeps on happening. And even with a fairly liberal president, it's not like President Obama has turned his back on the religious right, or on, let's say, religion, and he really can't afford to do so, is the prevailing belief. You know, hopefully that will change.
Right. Well, science, the reason they hate science is because it doesn't work for them. And it's as simple as this. If if evolution is true, which it is, that is the death of the literal Bible, starting at Genesis. It's the death of the creationism fable. And since that can't be, something else must be true, and that's the way the logic works. That's why their pseudoscience, such as it is, they adopt the language of science. They want the credibility of science, but they don't want to do the hard work. They like to just claim things, the existence of God and all the shortcuts, all the logical proofs and everything, just assume what they're trying to prove. So science hasn't worked well for them, and you know, you can just see this in the way they approach things, the way they attack evolution in particular. They try to make theory a dirty word, but in science, theory actually is the working correct answer for something until proven different. A theory is something that corresponds to all known information on a subject and is contradicted by none. That's a theory. That is the correct answer.
Right, and it's hard.
And they think it's really just a wild-ass guess.
Right, and it's used in both ways, the scientific way that you describe, and then that very loose, popular way, oh, well, my theory is whatever, and that's not even your hypothesis, that's your random guess based on your minuscule thing with going with your gut. Which, you know, like you say, that whole feeling of George Bush, that entitlement and arrogance to just go with his gut as if that's doing any work. He's skipping all the work and coming to a conclusion that he, you know, wants to reach. Michael Shermer talks about how we really start with our beliefs, to some degree, and then rationalize them, and you really see that at work, where people, no matter how many facts you present, no matter how many scientists will discuss evolution and all the 20 ways that it interlocks, and it really is right there to believe if you want to understand it, how they're able to push all of that aside, and the cognitive dissonance doesn't really bother them.
Right. Well, atheists were hunted for bounty for 1,500 years. And that was just part of the bigger, I don't know how to say it, it was highly lethal. If somebody walked in the room and said, "Are there any atheists here?" You raise your hand, that's highly lethal. So you didn't do that for most of the last 2 millennia.
And I think one of the reasons that I want to be involved with this show is that right now we're at a relatively safe time to try to speak out about these things, address them, and do something about it. People always ask with Nazi Germany, how could the German people have let this happen? And a lot at one point, it eventually became where they were going to get gunned down if they didn't do it. In America, we're not at that point. So this is the time.
Well, we have no blasphemy laws, and the internet has opened up a window.
Right.
When I got my first computer, I've told this story before, the first thing I did was go looking for atheists, and I found a bunch of other atheists who were also looking for atheists. In the last 20 years, I think the internet is the primary tool for the advancement, the growth, the mushrooming growth of atheists. And at this point, we're making headway so fast that, we're kind of winning the debate right now, especially among youth, because under 30, over a third of kids under 30, especially more educated ones, have basically become unaffiliated, have rejected religious dogma.
Right.
And that's not for good reason.
Right. It's not to say that they're not as kindly, or they're not don't want to be spiritual in some way. It's not being involved in science. Like Carl Sagan, and Richard Dawkins also, like they try to show the flavor of science and that there's great wonder and awe to the universe. Mm-hmm. It's not like if you aren't willing to believe in God, you just have this dry, cold life.
Right.
I would argue very much the other way. If you want to just read a book and take that as everything literal, not do any thinking or feeling yourself, that's a far colder existence.
Yeah, and also probably pretty immoral, unethical to do it that way. Facts.
Okay.
I remember about 25 years ago seeing Jimmy Swaggart on TV before he got caught banging hookers in a hotel in Louisiana. Saw him on TV holding up his Bible going, "This is the greatest science book ever written." Well, that's demonstrably false in about 1,000 ways. And one of the things they have wrong, one of my favorites, is witches. Witches are a biblical thing. They say, and it says in Exodus 22:18, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." That's a direct command from God. Kill witches. So that was for a long time taken very literally, and still in Africa there are witch hunters today, including friends of Sarah Palin who are witch hunters in Africa. So, short on facts, bad science, and one thing the Bible has always been bad about is science in particular. Not just one science, but biology, chemistry, astronomy, pretty much everything. The size, shape, age, location, and relative importance of the Earth.
Yeah, there's
they
not a
got
lot
the wrong on all of it. So what are you supposed to trust?
Well, I think you're supposed to look past that. But it really is true that the only reason they'll turn to science now is that it's completely embarrassing not to. But anything that you check that they had predicted ahead of time is basically wrong. And all of the prophecies were sort of written after the fact. So they try to get credit in a sense of, look at all these things that they predicted. He knew that Israel would be roaming for 400 years. They wrote that 600 years afterward, and so they look back and they make it up, and then they try to claim that as some sort of evidence. And it's just a different mindset, and we need to get out of that. We need to get out of the blind belief as a good thing.
Yeah.
In terms of the burning of witches, most of those were women. I wanted to read something from Leviticus here that just shows this overall feeling that women are polluted. They're Pandora, they're Eve, they're the ones that brought mankind down, and that it doesn't flow from nowhere. Some of this comes because the Bible says some, nasty things. I don't know if you have something. I got to find the quote if you.
I'm looking at Leviticus 19. I think it's 22.
I got a 2018 here.
Or 1822, one of them that talks about
here's one.
gays.
This is a different one, but yeah, there's certainly lots of anti-gay stuff. And if a man shall lie with a woman having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered her fountain of her blood, and both of them shall be cut off from among their people. So women who bear our children and menstruate once a month are basically polluted for that week or for a quarter of their lives. And this goes on, I don't know that I want to read the whole thing, but it just goes on. And I'm not sure what half of our population is supposed to do with the Bible just sort of saying that they've unleashed all of the horrors, and then that for a quarter of their life they're really dirty and nasty and unclean. They should be separated from society. If a man lies with a woman, then he needs to be cut off too. I get the feeling men didn't write this portion.
Right. And by the way, a woman who gives birth to a female child is twice as dirty as the male child. Yeah,
so it's hard to run away from the misogyny. And that's Annotated Guide to the Bible. It's just a great site for people. Some people don't want to hear it. This is my belief, this is my God, I don't want to hear anything bad about it, just let me be on my way. For anybody who's actually interested in seeing what the Bible says and some of the nastiness that we talk about, if you go to that Skeptics Annotated Bible, you can look up the misogyny, or you can look up
well, here are the categories. The verses are categorized by absurdities, cruelty and violence, injustice, intolerance, about women and misogyny, about sex, about contradictions, family values, and a number of it, homosexuality, politics, science and history. So it's a really well done, comprehensive critique.
Right, so it's very comprehensive, I found. And if you just go through there, read some of the verses yourself, and decide, does this make any sense to you? Does it seem compassionate? Does it seem scientifically justified? Does it seem correct? And it's not just wrong and immoral because some of the atheists are telling you. Go read it yourself. That's all we would like more of these sort of nice religious people to do, who aren't necessarily fundamentalists, who aren't out to hurt people, who are just trying to have a good spiritual, healthy life. Read some of this, because I don't think you would agree with most of it.
Right, and there are other things here that are also, there's a lot of weird stuff in the Bible too. God apparently had a fixation with dung. This is from Malachi 2, starting with verse 1, where he says, "And now, O ye priests, this commandment is for you." And you go on, "Behold, I will corrupt your seed and spread dung upon your faces." Okay, really?
Yeah, there's another one with dung.
That's the punishment straight from God with his own hands. He's going to,
right. If a 10-year-old is making fart jokes, it would make sense. If God is putting in his holy book to throw that in, seems a little bit
rub dung strange. In your face. That is a little.
And he does that with Ezekiel when he's sitting out front in the temple for 390 days for how long Jerusalem will be separated or punished, and then 40 for Judah, forgot the other Judah.
Jeremiah?
No, I'm sorry, for the other city instead of Jerusalem. Judah. But at any rate, God says, and you also need to eat this bread. He gives them a whole recipe for bread, how to mix it up, cooked over human dung.
Right.
Because eventually your people will also have to eat tainted food. And so then Ezekiel protests, and it's like, no, I've kept your commandments. I've never eaten anything that you told me not to. So God backs off and says, fine, cook it over cow dung. That will be good enough. But it's just, you're right, there's this fixation of who introduced that. Like, we didn't put it there to make fun of them. The Onion didn't put it there as a satire and a joke. This is actually what's in the Bible. And I don't know how you defend that. There's so many, he's got problems with sex, he's got problems with women, he's got problems with freedom. There's a lot of things that people should not be supporting.
Also has problems with anger management too. Exodus 22, verse 24. "And my wrath shall wax hot, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless." That's a bit stark, a bit harsh, and I don't know exactly what would inspire that, but it brings us to the Ten Commandments.
Right, well, and what's funny, what does inspire, it's funny, it's not, from the stuff I read, it's not necessarily bad behavior. There'll be constant references to, like, Jerusalem, where you failed me. You're not treating your people correctly, you're stealing from each other, you're lying. and you're worshiping idols. It always ends with that confession. The thing that God is actually upset about is that we're worshiping another God than Him. And He goes through great lengths, and it's always an I am your Lord thy God, and I say this. And there's this sadistic guy, not a loving God.
Right, and you're talking about the First Amendment, the First Commandment, actually, which says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Well, he addresses the actual penalty for that in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, in 1 Samuel, in Joshua again, and in Numbers. And the penalty is not merely death; it's genocide against generations of your family, just because you didn't fall for this belief. If you couldn't find it in your head to do this, He's going to kill you and your children and their children. I'm not sure how they have children when they've been killed, but
yeah, there's a lot of slaughter of children and innocents involved in the Bible.
Same thing with the second commandment, graven images. Now, again, Stark, Florida, a month ago, they erected this, the Ten Commandments monument there, which is a graven image. The little crosses that Christians like to wear around their necks, graven images. Not just graven images, but a torture device on top of that. Also, genocide against your family and your kids and their kids. And same for, number 3, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain, death penalty. And that's in Leviticus, that's in Deuteronomy, and in Mark. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. There's been a lot of fun made with this one. On West Wing, when the president confronted a religious broadcaster about penalties, and that was one. My neighbor works on Sunday, should I kill him myself or turn him over to the police to have it done? And more like that.
Well, and that's why we need separation of church and state, because when you get some of these radicals running the government, you turn them over to the state, and instead of laughing and saying you're a nut job, give this to Sarah Palin, Bachman, Perry, George Bush. Maybe they will say, you know what, they did work on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So it's important that we recognize the political infiltration by the religious right and call them out on it, and hopefully mobilize a bunch of people that are just religious because they're brought up that way, but not nasty.
But also their occasional and self-serving requirement for literal interpretations. Well, if you want to be literal on the Bible, there's a whole bunch of people you got to kill. And you got to do it with stones, no guns. Sword here and there maybe, but stones is a preferred punishment here, preferred way to do it. And almost all the, what's always fun is to ask, if somebody starts spouting off about the 10 Commandments, ask, what are the 10 Commandments? And just watch them flounder. I showed some footage of that I recorded at an event in Leesburg where I asked somebody exactly that, and they were just pretty much flustered to silence. They just don't even know what the 10 Commandments are, whereas most atheists seem to.
It'd also be nice to ask, why are commandments number 1 and 2 not much about morality, several of them. Well, why don't they start off with, don't kill, don't steal? And
the first 4 have strictly to do with the proper and mandatory worship of the Christian deity. And after that, they get into things that are technically a little more humanistic in nature. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, don't commit adultery. Most of these have death penalties, except lying, which calls for fair retribution as the punishment for that. And thou shalt not covet, there's not even a penalty for that. As Dave Silverman pointed out recently, this is the foundation of our the market system of capitalism. So the punishment actually in the Bible is approximately a stern look, nothing worse. So there's this ridiculous set of punishments for stuff. And these are the 10 most important things they can come up with. What's not in there is the Golden Rule. It's not one of the 10 Commandments. There's no prohibition against physical assault on somebody. No prohibition against rape or abuse of women. So some of the priorities are a little askew on top of everything else.
Yeah. One thing, we got a couple minutes left. I want you to read one Ezekiel part where it just kind of shows some of God's character, where he sees Jerusalem as the woman that scorned him, because maybe I won't read, we can just talk about it because we don't have a lot of time, but it just goes into this elaborate detail. You can see this is a hurt guy whose girlfriend broke up with him, and now he's just going to destroy her. And so if people want to read on themselves, Ezekiel 15, I got 6 through 8, and 16, 2 through 42. And it's just this brutality of how I am going to destroy you because you don't want to worship me. I gave you jewels, I decorated you, I made you pretty, I took you from when you were a little babe that, no, you weren't a beautiful land, and now I've made you this, and now you walk away from me. And so, again, he'll sometimes throw in, and you're mistreating people around you, and you're lying to each other, but it's really all about him being rejected by these people and going to Baal instead, choosing another god or another host of gods instead. And what kind of moral leadership are we getting from that? You can see an abusive father doing so many of these same things, and how can you not see it? Read some of this stuff and challenge yourself to say, yeah, that's a loving God.
Yeah, and of course, there's a lot of analysis on the internet. Watching a lot of YouTube lately, Atheist Experience and Presuppositional Apologetics and all this, and they talk about this this loving, omnipotent, omnibenevolent, loving God. Is this the same God that gives babies eye cancer? Gives babies AIDS? What is the criteria for morality when that's perfectly acceptable? And we're told, well, this is God is not held to the same standard, but we're supposed to be judged by standards set by God. And it makes no sense on its face.
Right, so I'm not sure if it's that God's not held to the same standard, but we can't comprehend God's magnificence.
We can't comprehend, which excuses him for the most horrific treatment, genocide, disease, just horrific abuse and murder and mayhem. Everything that goes wrong in the world, that's his mysterious plan, and it can't be judged by any moral code if it's God doing it. However, if we do it, it's clearly, obviously wrong. That's why, the default set of ethical standards for most atheists is, secular humanism.
Right.
Humanism based on happiness for humans.
That issue, I believe it's called theodicy, and like how people, even the best apologists for years and years, that has always been their hardest problem. How do you explain how all these horrible things happen to the good people and bad people get away with all sorts of stuff? And you can make up stories.
And the apologists get tied in knots, just trying to explain how a loving God, a forgiving.
Right, and that's why a lot of people turn from religion. Like, if their kid gets cancer, their sister gets raped, there's a million horrible things that can happen. And then when it's personalized like that, because most people don't go by this strict logic, it's an emotional response first. So when something terrible happens to a good person or you're friendly with, it gets harder to justify and accept.
Exactly. It looks like we're just about out of time. Time flew today.
We're
hoping for more call-ins, but.
Yes, and we'll keep numbers posted. People should visit us on Facebook. If you want to ask questions there, we can try to address those during the next program.
Yep. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter.
And see Pope Francis on Twitter, because you can get out of hell or purgatory.
See you next time.